I was sitting here in the restaurant and thinking back on my life. I've been through a lot of wild things in my life. Wild is probably not the right word. Strange, weird, different. It all fits. Maybe my life was normal. Maybe everyone had a similar life, but it just wasn't talked about. No, it couldn't be, unless everyone was in prison. I got time served for a crime I committed. You see, I took out a man. I got 15 to life, and now I'm out. According to the judge, I had extenuating circumstances. So wow, I'll be out in just 15 years. At least I got out 5 years earlier than expected, with a deferment for good behavior. 15 goddamn years for destroying the man I thought was raping my wife. If I knew what I know now, there probably wouldn't be two people there at once if I couldn't just walk away. I am a man, and I had a lot of pride at the time. Let me explain life and how I see it. People around us behave in certain ways, and we react to their actions. Gosh, that sounds silly. Let me give you some examples. All movie stars have sex and get married now and then. The movies themselves are all about sex. Now television is all about sex. So when I'm in public, I look at every woman and think about sex. However, some women I wouldn't go within 10 feet of, well, unless you've been in prison for 15 years. And there are some women I'd almost go to jail for until I got away from reality. For today's youth, all this stuff and lifestyle is the norm. But for us slightly older people, especially those who have been out of the workforce for a while, it's sexy as hell and very embarrassing. I don't even know where to begin my story. I have enough information in my head to write a book. I will start, I think, with the story of my once beautiful marriage, which ended in divorce when I went to prison. Rita had been my wife for almost 10 years. I had just graduated from college and was a regular guy looking for a job. I showed up at one firm, and while I was waiting for an interview, I kept glancing at the receptionist. Damn, what a cute girl woman! At 22, I looked at women the way a younger guy would. They were girls, broads, chicks, or women. All of those words were interchangeable to me. I kept smiling at the receptionist, who turned out to be Rita. We struck up a conversation, and eventually I asked her out on a date. I got the date, but not the job. I found a job selling hardware. It was a well-paying job. I got both a salary and sales bonuses. Life was going pretty well for me, fresh out of college. A girlfriend and a good job. I was on my way to a successful career in life. Just a few months later, I proposed to Rita, and we married the mayor of our town. I couldn't have been happier. We bought a nice house and started a family. A year later, we had a son, and 2 more years later, a daughter. As far as I knew, life was good. We had problems, but we also had good times. Our life went on just like all of your neighbors. We took care of the kids, took them on vacations, and had the usual neighborhood barbecues. I never suspected that my wife was anything but faithful and loving to me. I know I was faithful to her. I had many chances for affairs as I traveled a lot, but I did my best to be a loving husband and stay on track. I must admit it was hard at times, but I kept my pride and always put my family first. We decided to build a pool for the kids. Well, actually it was for all of us. That's what I'm trying to say. I never expected this development. I thought we had a loving marriage, a good relationship. I must have been walking around in the Neverland with my eyes closed. Rita seemed like a good wife and mother to me. We had problems and arguments, of course, just like any other married couple we knew. Even 15 years later, I still can't get over it. Where the hell did I go wrong? We installed a pool and enjoyed it. The children, who were 7 and 9 years old at the time, were in the pool all the time. Rita and I would go there after dark and we would do it in the water. After the first couple of times, Rita decided she needed to put up a fence so the neighbors wouldn't see us while we were in the pool. I started putting up the fence the next day, installing the fence posts. I knew it would take a week to install on my own, so I left all the tools I would need, like a wheelbarrow and shovels. The only tools I put down were hand and power tools in case it rained. I had to go out of town for a couple days and told Rita that I would finish the fence when I got back. As usual, she got mad at me, saying that I never stay at home like other husbands. I explained to her for the 100th time that I was a salesman and had to travel. It was my job. She yelled at me and told me that I should be at home like other husbands, stay at home and protect my family. She was always saying things like that to piss me off. I told her that if anyone tried to attack her, we had a gun in the nightstand next to the bed. What was a guy to do? A lot of men traveled. Did their wives always complain? Maybe I should get a job where I don't have to travel. I'll talk to her about it after this trip. The money will be a lot less, but at least I'll be home. That might satisfy her. In the morning, I kissed her goodbye and told her I would try to be home in 2 days. I told her to take care of herself and to call. She told me not to worry, she might not be home. Again, she played the woe is me game. And I left on my journey. The first night I was to stay only 40 miles from home. I usually stayed in a motel to get a quick start on the next day. After our fight, I decided to surprise her by going home and making the extra drive the next morning. By the time I got home, it was getting dark and I pulled up in front of the house. There was a strange car parked across the street. Being a salesman, I always notice things like that. The lights in the house were off except for the lamp in the living room. I turned the knob, but the storm door was locked, so I went to the back door by the pool. I heard Rita screaming and rushed to the back porch. There, Rita was being raped by a stranger. I heard her screams, but I didn't listen to what she was saying. I grabbed a shovel, ran out to the pool deck, and hit the rapist as hard as I could with the shovel on the back of his head and neck. I must have hit him 3 times, but I don't know exactly. He rolled off Rita onto his back, and there was blood everywhere. Rita started screaming again. "What did you do? What the hell did you do?" I think she was in shock as I ran into the house and called 911. Rita was screaming and crying at the same time until the paramedics and police arrived. There were 2 ambulances there. One took the rapist and the other took Rita. The police officers told me that they would have to handcuff me, take me to the station, and interrogate me. I said I understood, but I needed to know where my children were. The officer said he asked my wife if anyone else was there, and she said our kids were spending the night at her sister's house. They were planning on being there. I thought, thank goodness they weren't home. God knows what might have happened if they had been there. Rita's sister Thelma was a real beauty. She was 2 years younger than Rita and was always going out on dates. She was stocky with a pretty face. When she was around me, she was always flirting. I could have fallen in love with her very easily. Now looking back, I think I picked the wrong sister. Funny how a nice girl like Thelma never married, at least not in the 10 years I knew her. When we got to the station, the officers took me into a room and started asking me questions. I told them to tell them everything I knew, and then I would answer any other questions they might have. I started by telling them how Rita and I had a fight, and I decided to surprise her and go home. When I saw the man raping her, my adrenaline just went into overdrive. I grabbed a shovel and started hitting him with it. The whole time I was telling them that Rita was screaming. I mentioned that the night before, Rita had said that she thought I should be home at night to protect her and the kids, so that was the first thing I thought when I saw the intruder. The officers asked me if I knew the man, and I said I did not. "Have you ever seen him before?" the officer asked. I told them he seemed a little familiar, but I couldn't identify him. That's when I got the shocking news. I had been arrested for second-degree murder. I couldn't believe it. I told the officer it was impossible. I came home and found a man raping my wife, and I stopped the assault and was arrested. "We just got back from talking to your wife, and we took her statement." "She wasn't raped, it was her boyfriend, and they had sex," the officer said. "God, no, that can't be true. Rita is my loving wife. We have 2 children together. She hasn't had an affair," I cried. The officer looked at me and said, "Boy, I'm really sorry for you, but you killed a man tonight. You took the law into your own hands, and now you will have to stand trial for his death." I stopped talking. My mind stopped working. I had no idea what was going to happen next. The officers handcuffed me and took me to a cell, and then removed the handcuffs. The next morning, I was taken to court for arraignment and bail. I was ordered to pay $1 million and was charged with second-degree murder. That meant I would have to find $100,000 to get out on bail. The only way was to cash out our savings and maybe take out a second mortgage. I called the house and got only an answering machine. I was never bailed out. Rita never returned my calls and never spoke to me alone again at all. The next time I saw her was in court when she literally testified against me. They say a wife shouldn't testify against her husband, but Rita volunteered. The Alan I killed was her boyfriend. It looked like she was going to ask me for a divorce and marry Alan. I couldn't prove I didn't know Alan. How do you prove you don't know someone? Alan has been working with Rita for the past few months. He was divorced and started pursuing Rita. Apparently, she fell in love with him and was going to marry him. They'd been together for the last few months. The prosecution made a case against me for revenge, saying that I knew about the affair and wanted to get even, and I found my chance. I had no defense, especially since my wife was acting as a witness for the prosecution. I was doomed. Rita must have really hated me for killing Alan. She wouldn't even let me see my kids. The only person who came to see me was my brother. Ray was the one who told me everything he'd learned about Rita and the kids. I was going to serve a minimum sentence of 20 years to life. For the first couple of years, Ray came by every few months to let me know what was going on. He told me that Rita had sold the house and she and the kids had moved, but where exactly he didn't know. He said that as far as he knew, she had even managed to turn the kids against me. He never saw them after the move. Let's face it, they were 7 and 9 years old at the time. Ray mentioned that he and his family were moving to Florida, and when I went out to visit him. That was the last time I saw him. Before I was sent upstairs, my former supervisor visited me. He told me that he thought I had been framed and acted as a witness to my character. He was a decent man. Of course, he had to write in my report that he had to let me go. Legal stuff, you know how it is? I asked for one favor. I had a 401k savings account that I had been contributing to for 10 years for retirement. I asked him if he could just keep it with him and not tell Rita or her lawyers that I had it. He said that if they found out any other way, he would have to give up the paperwork, but he wouldn't bring it up. He wished me the best under the circumstances and went on his way. I need to tell you about Thelma, Rita's sister. She never visited me, but she kept in touch with me for a while. She wrote to me and told me about my children and how they were doing. According to her, Rita tried to turn the kids against me, but every chance she got, she tried to tell them what a nice guy I was. She always signed her letters, "Love, Thelma." Damn, I wish that was true. She wrote to me for about 8 years. Then the letters stopped. I don't know if it had something to do with my transfer to another prison. Oh, I forgot. They like to call it a correctional facility. I started at Mansfield Correctional Facility, and then when Mansfield was closed, I was transferred to Orient Prison. At the same time I was at Mansfield, there was another Dan Jones who was transferred to Lucasville Prison in southern Ohio. I thought maybe he had started getting my mail. It was a joke because we had our own private number. In the last letters I received from Thelma 8 years before, she told me that Rita had sold the house and moved in with her. The kids were doing well, but Rita got multiple sclerosis, a terrible muscle disease. They only gave her a few years. I know I was angry with her, but seeing her fade away was something I wouldn't wish on her. Besides, she was still the mother of my children. Thelma told me not to write to her because if Rita found out she was in touch with me, it would be very unpleasant. Now I was out of prison, back in my old hometown, sitting down with a cup of coffee and breathing in the free air. Let's see, my son would be 24 and my daughter 22. I had no idea what they looked like, had never seen a picture of them in the last 7 years since Thelma stopped writing to me. Now, whenever I saw a young man passing by, I always asked about my children. I hated Rita for what she had done to me and our family, and I was afraid to see her because I would end up in jail again. I couldn't hate my children. Parents don't do that. Maybe they never knew the real story and think their father is a murderer. Now it's time to plan for the rest of your life. Chapter 2. What's next? I found a room in one of the boarding houses in the old neighborhood. I figured I'd better go visit my old boss if he was still alive and see if Rita had found out about my 401k retirement plan. I never told her about it. I might have a few bucks on top of the couple hundred I made in prison. Hell, when no one would give me money, I made it and spent it. Lucky I had some left over. I walked into the store. It looked very different. I asked the clerk if Jim owned the store, and he said he did and was in the back room. I told the guy that I was an old friend of his and asked if I could surprise him. The guy looked me over from head to toe a few times and told me to go inside. When I entered the office, an elderly man looked up at me and shouted, "Jesus, Dan, they told me you were dead." I looked up at my old friend and said, "No, I'm very much alive, as you can see." "How are you, Jim?" "It's good to see you. You're the first friendly face I've seen in 15 years. I was there for about an hour and we got to talking. He told me about all the changes in the business and how his family was growing. He even offered me a job at the store. He said that no one was as good at selling hardware as I was. He would like to offer me a job in the field, but because of my background, I probably can't get one right now. I asked him about my 401k contribution, and he said that no one had ever asked about it and that it had been sitting there for the last 15 years gaining interest. He said he was going to leave it alone and contact my kids when I retired and give them the money. I asked him to find out how much it was worth because I needed the funds to get back on my feet. He asked me to stop by on Monday next week when he would have information for me and I could start my new sales position. He liked to put it that way rather than job. We shook hands and I headed for the exit of the store. I wondered why he thought I was dead. I'll have to ask my parole officer about it next week. He'll be happy to hear that I found a job so quickly. He was a pretty nice guy, but I've heard he's pretty strict when it comes to parolees. I headed to Thelma's last known address. Damn, she was such a nice woman. I wondered if Rita lived with her and what was wrong with my kids. I was really nervous as I rode the bus to their street. The neighborhood didn't look like it had changed at all. Some of the houses were a little dilapidated and others had been spruced up. New siding and windows. I had seen Thelma's house before and had to stop before I approached it. I didn't know how to approach it. What if Rita opened the door? I nervously walked up the stairs and knocked on the door. A woman's voice came from inside the house. Wait, I'll be right there. It sounded like Thelma. I had my back turned to the door and was looking outside when I heard a voice behind me say, "Can I help you?" Through the door. I turned around and saw Thelma looking at me. Oh my God, Danny, is that really you? Oh my God. She opened the door. She came out and hugged me. She started crying. Other than the fact that she had aged a little, she looked as good as ever. I know I shouldn't say this, but those big soft breasts pressing against me started to turn me on a little. Oh my God, Danny, they said you were killed in prison. God, I'm so happy to see you, she continued to hug me. Come in, Danny, please come in. She seemed to calm down a little. Before I went in, I asked her about Rita. I didn't want to go in if she was there. Danny, Rita died 2 years ago from multiple sclerosis. Please come in and we can talk about everything. I was saddened when I heard this. Even though I hated her actions, she was my wife for 10 years and the mother of my children. My children, what about them? I had many questions as I entered Thelma's house. As soon as I entered the living room, Thelma turned and hugged me again. She laid her head on my chest and cried. For the next few moments, I just hugged her. God, she was so soft, so warm, my eyes started to water. Danny, she always called me Danny, do you want something to eat or drink? Thelma, I'm not hungry right now, but coffee would be nice. I have so many questions, and I'd like to just sit with you over a cup of coffee and talk. She poured each of us a cup. She remembered that I'd taken black and said we'd be more comfortable in the living room. When we put the coffee on, she asked me to wait a minute because she needed to check on Danny. I thought for a second and asked, Danny? Who's Danny, Thelma? Thelma looked at me and said, Oh my goodness, I forgot you didn't know. Danielle is your granddaughter. We call her Danny. Beth named her after you? I got up and followed Thelma into the bedroom where the sweetest little girl I had ever seen was sleeping. Tears immediately came to my eyes. It was my granddaughter. My little girl, who I had last seen when she was 7 years old, had gotten married and now had a daughter of her own. Thelma said it was my daughter, Beth, and her husband's baby. Danny was about 2.5 years old. God, how I wanted to hold her in my arms. Thelma whispered that I could hold her later, but right now we had a lot of catching up to do. She took my hand, and we walked back into the living room to start our conversation. Where do you want to start, Danny? Maybe you should tell me everything you can about Rita and then we'll move on to happier things, I said. Rita started having an affair after this guy Alan started working there. I suspected there might be a problem here because whenever you went out of town, the kids would come to see me. The first few times I didn't pay much attention to it until it became a habit. I would never say no to having your kids here. I love them like I'm their mother. Thelma, forgive me for saying this, but you are a very beautiful woman. Why didn't you ever marry and start a family? You are so good with children. First of all, smartass, she smiled at me. I've had many marriage proposals. I always thought I had to love a man if I wanted to have children with him. I was so much in love with one man, but he was taken. I never found a man that met my standards of the man of my dreams. I dated, and yes, Danny, I had sex with men I really liked, but there was no love. Your kids were with me all the time, so I wasn't childless. I just never met another man who met the high standards I set. So far, I've had a happy and good life. Who knows what the future holds for me? I wish Rita thought the way you do. She married me and lived with me for 10 years, and apparently I didn't live up to her standards. Thelma stepped in. I'm sorry, Danny, Rita was a fool. I know she's dead and I miss her as a sister. She gave up her dream life, and for what? I'm sorry, Danny, maybe I shouldn't think so, but she was wrong, completely wrong. She had everything and she gave it all up. thus ruining your life and deeply hurting her children. I lost respect for her when I found out about Alan that horrible night. I loved her like a sister, but I wanted to kill her myself. We argued and argued about what she did until the day she died. Thelma started to cry, so I moved to the couch next to her and put my arms around her. Coming to her senses, she continued. Rita kept dating. I think it was her way of getting even with you. I had the kids about half the time. After a couple years, Rita started getting sick. Her muscles were failing. She went to the doctor, and that's when it was discovered that she had multiple sclerosis. She was able to work for about 2 more years, but then it became too hard for her. That's when I suggested she sell the house and move in with me. She got medical leave and then Social Security. I continued to work as a cashier at the local market. On the income from the sale of the house and work, we were doing okay. About 2 years ago, Rita passed away. The children had already gone to their families, and at that time it was just Rita and me living here. What a wonderful sister you are. You shelter your sister and her 2 children and take care of them. But what about your life, Thelma? You brought all these problems into your life and you took care of others. It was family, Danny. I did it for the family. Hell, my life isn't over yet. I'm only in my early 40s, and if you'll excuse me, I still look damn good. She smiled again. I don't know a prettier sight unless it's that little girl in the other room, I replied. What about my children, Thelma? What can you tell me about them? They're wonderful, Danny. At first, Rita tried to turn them against you, but they spent so much time here and kept asking questions about you. And when they got older, I told them the truth. Their mom was having an affair and you thought she was being attacked and tried to protect her. They broke down and cried. They love you, Danny, or should I say loved you. They think you're dead too. What happened, Danny? How come you showed up dead? Tell me exactly what you did. Maybe we can work it out. Well, I wrote to you in Mansfield, and then one day your letter came back and said you weren't there anymore. After a lot of phone calls, we, meaning the kids and I, found out that you had been transferred to Lucasville. Wait, Thelma, I've never been to Lucasville. I've been transferred to the Orient facility. Keep doing what you did. We called Lucasville and asked for your number. We didn't have it. We didn't know if it matched your old one or not, so the guy told us to give us your name. We told him Dan Jones and that Mansfield had transferred you there. He said he would check it out and call us back. He called back the next day and said, I am sorry to inform you that Dan Jones, who was transferred from Mansfield, was killed last week during a prisoner uprising. He expressed regret, but the body had been cremated, and he could send us all the records if we wanted them. We told him there was no need and hung up. The kids and I cried. Later we told Rita about it, but she was speechless at that moment. So that's what happened. The other Dan Jones was transferred to Lucasville and died, and I went east. I missed you very much, not getting your letters. It was the only thing that kept me together for 8 years. The pictures of the kids and the wonderful stories you always told me. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought you were in love with me. I looked at Thelma, and I thought she was going to say something back, but she didn't. Well, anyway, Danny, let me tell you a little about your family. I'll start by saying that Beth and Ed or Eddie were high school sweethearts. They've been dating since 10th grade. Ed's a good man, Danny. He reminds me a lot of you. He's a hard worker, always puts family first, and loves his wife very much. I closed my eyes for a second when Thelma said that. I had once really loved Rita, but not now. Thelma continued. Beth and Ed wanted to get married right after high school graduation. I told them I thought they were too young, but Beth said, Aunt Thelma, I love Eddie, I really do. I lost my father and my mother will be gone any day now. I love you, Auntie, but I need Eddie. I knew she meant what she said and gave her my best wishes. Eddie is working hard at a big car factory. He is an apprentice welder. Someday he will be making big money. Beth works as a cashier at the same store as me. We both work part-time and on different shifts. That way, one of us will always be there for little Danny. What about Mike, Thelma? What happened to him? Oh, you'd be proud of him. He went to a local college and graduated with honors. He said he was going to be a salesman like his father. The only difference is that he sells computers and runs his own business out of his home. You also have a grandson named Mike Jr., who is 3 years old and a very beautiful daughter-in-law named Rachel. Now we need to find a way to break the news to everyone without them going into shock. While we were talking, a little girl came in, wiping her eyes and calling babysitter. God, what a beautiful baby. She came over and Thelma took her in her arms. Danny, I want you to meet someone. This is your mom's dad. This is your grandfather. She looked at me and smiled. I didn't want to insist the first time, so I just said, Hi, sweetie. It's really nice to meet you, and kissed her hand. I decided it was time for me to leave. I got up, and Thelma said she would call the kids tonight and tell them I had stopped by. We would make arrangements for me to meet everyone at the same time, so there would be no problem with who saw me first. I gave Thelma the phone number where I was staying. There was a payphone in the hallway for the tenants to use. I gotta go shopping and buy a few things. I had to wait until Monday to find out how much money I would have. I hopped on the bus and got off at the store to buy some groceries. I had a small built-in kitchen and one large room with a bed and a couch. I didn't have a TV, but I didn't watch it. By the time a good program was on, our lights were always out. As I was walking back to my apartment, I passed the phone and it rang. I looked around and didn't see anyone, so I answered it. Hi, I said. Is Mr. Dan Jones there, please? From the voice, it was a young woman. It's Dan. How can I help you? Daddy, you're alive! This is your daughter, Beth. I'm at Aunt Thelma's and she told me you were here. She cried. Daddy, I miss you and I love you. Can you come to Aunt Thelma's tomorrow? I already called Mike and he'll be there too. Gosh, Beth, I love you too, honey. I met the sweetest little girl today. She's beautiful, just like her mommy. She was still crying. Yes, honey, I'll come over. It's been so long since I've seen you. Take care. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Beth, and always have. Then I hung up the phone. I went into my room and started crying, only they were tears of joy. I couldn't sleep. I was nervous. I got up and went out for a walk. I needed something to do. I was going to see my family for the first time in 15 years. I had 2 grandchildren, a daughter-in-law and a son-in-law. And then there was Thelma. What was not to love about Thelma? Beautiful, happy, loving, caring, took care of her sick sister and raised my children, and now helped my grandchildren and me. She was 1 in a million, and I married her sister. The next morning, the phone rang in the hall. I answered it, and it was Thelma. She said she hadn't thought about the fact that I didn't have a car, and she would pick me up around 3:45. It was Friday, and everyone decided it would be fun since no one had to work the next day. Thelma got here just in time. I had already gone outside and bought a new shirt and pants. Then I looked at my shoes and picked out a new pair. I felt like I was going to a job interview that I really didn't want to fail. Thelma honked her horn even though I was sitting on the porch swing waiting for her. I knew she was doing it on purpose. I smiled at her as I walked to the car. When she stopped in front of the house, I was nervous. I was almost afraid to get out of the car. I hadn't seen my children in 15 years, and now they were adults. I got out of the car, and a young woman came running down the stairs screaming, Daddy, Daddy! Beth wrapped her arms around me and cried. I missed you so much, Daddy, and then we thought you were dead. I clung to her, hugged her, and cried with her. By then, everyone was on the porch. My son Mike came down and gave me a hug too. Hi, Daddy, it's so good to see you. I hugged him, and then we all went into the house where the introductions took place. Beth introduced me to her husband, Ed, who extended his hand and said, It's a pleasure to meet you, sir, and just so you know, I'm very fond of your daughter. Beth tearfully took Danny in her arms and said, You met Danny yesterday. She was named after you, Daddy. Her name is Danielle, which I knew since Thelma had told me the day before. She handed me Danny and said, Danny, this is Grandpa. Give him a hug and a kiss. The girl came over to me, put her arms around my neck and pressed herself tightly against me, then kissed me on the cheek. I did the same with her and handed her back to Beth. Mike said, Dad, I want you to meet the love of my life. This is Rachel. I looked at Mike and asked if I could give her a hug. She answered for him and said, I won't break, Daddy. And you can hug me anytime you want. She called me Daddy as I wrapped my arms around her and hugged her tightly. I looked down and a little boy looked up at me and said, Hi, Daddy. My name is Mikey. I'm 3 years old, but I'll be 4 next month. I picked him up, gave him a hug, and said, It's really nice to meet you, Mikey. He leaned over and whispered in my ear, We're going to throw a party for you. We should go to the patio. I whispered back, Okay, Mikey, you drive. We all went out on the patio, and there was a big poster hanging there that said, Welcome home, Dad, signed by everyone. I knew Mike must have taken the time to make it on his computer. I sat down in my chair and cried. There was nothing I could do. All these years I had no one. My family was here, and I couldn't be happier at this moment. Everything was great. We talked about old times. We laughed and cried together. We even talked a little about Rita. I knew the kids loved their mom to the end, but hated what she had done to me. Thelma asked Mike and Ed to take the boxes and bags of my stuff upstairs. She told them where to find things in the basement. They brought some boxes and 2 bags of trash. Thelma said it was stuff left over from the kids, old books, some bowling trophies. They took out different objects and I told them stories about them. After they listened to the stories, they would ask if they could keep some of the items. I think these items became more meaningful when you learned why I kept them and where they came from. The trash bags were filled with my old clothes. I asked Thelma where all my clothes had gone. I knew I had a lot more than 2 bags of clothes. She said Mike went through everything and took everything he could use, and Ed went through the rest and took stuff for his job as a welder. I looked at Ed and asked him if he used my old clothes for welding. He looked at me strangely and replied, No, sir. I cut them up and used them as rags. Everyone started laughing. Apparently my clothes were outdated. I reached into my bag and pulled out a silk Hawaiian shirt, blue with yellow flowers on it. Maybe this would even make a good rag? I show him this shirt and 3 others. No, sir, silk, viscose, and nylon don't make good rags, he replied. I see I have 3 pairs of jeans. Mike, don't you wear jeans? Not the bells, Daddy. Everyone laughed again. Then Ed said, You know, sir, denim isn't good for rags either. The other bag contained underwear, both boxers and briefs. Mike, don't you wear underwear? Yeah, I know, Dad, but a man doesn't wear someone else's used underwear. There's just no such thing. Everyone was laughing. I thought, good thing they're not in jail. We had no choice there. You got the underwear they gave you. Ed, underwear is made of cotton. It's good for rags. Yes, sir, you're right. But people tend to say strange things when you use your underwear as rags. Well, at least I can wear them in socks. I have ties too, but I doubt they'll be useful. We were all getting ready to eat when Mike asked me if he could talk to me alone for a few minutes. I told him sure. I had no idea what he wanted to say that he couldn't say in front of everyone. When we entered the house, he looked at me very seriously and said, Daddy, do you know that Aunt Thelma is in love with you? I was half shocked. What? Mike, what gave you that idea? She told us all that, Daddy. We asked her why she never got married, and she said that the man she truly loved was already gone. We were mature teenagers at the time, and we weren't afraid to ask her anything. She was always honest with us. Beth asked her who was the man she loved so much, and she said it was you, Daddy. You were the man she loved. We all thought you were murdered, and I guess she figured telling us the truth after you were dead wouldn't hurt anyone. Dad, I just thought you should know. Other than my wife, Rachel, she's the nicest woman I know. Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you telling me. So know that I would never do anything to hurt her. You're right, she's a very special woman. We went back outside and joined the party. I kept looking at Thelma, and she kept looking at me. Mike had told me pretty much the same thing Thelma had told me yesterday. I knew I had to do something about it, but what? I had been in jail for less than a week, and I had nothing to offer. Everyone was getting ready to leave. Mike asked if I needed a ride home, but Thelma said she'd drive me herself. We said goodbye, and I helped Thelma clean up what was left of the mess, which wasn't much. Everyone did their part in cleaning up before we left. Chapter 3. Sex for the First Time. When everyone left, I asked Thelma if she could sit with me on the couch for a minute. I had a couple of questions that needed answering. Of course she agreed, and I took her hand and we sat down on the couch. Thelma, you told me yesterday that you never got married because the man you loved was unavailable. Who was that man? The kids told you, didn't they? I thought you were dead and I needed to tell someone. I've been holding it in for so long, I'm sorry, Danny. I'm sorry for what? I want to know if it's true. Did you love me? She took both my hands in hers and said, Yes, Danny, I loved you. And for the record, she squeezed my hands, I still do and always will. There were tears in her eyes. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't just say I love you too, because everything was so new to me at that moment, I wasn't sure. I wanted to be honest with Thelma. I knew I had to say something since she answered my question. Thelma, I don't know what to say. I've always had strong feelings for you, but since you were my sister-in-law and I was a married man, I never pursued them. To say that I like you very much would be an understatement. Other than my children, you are the only other person in my life. Would I want to stalk you or make love to you? Of course I would. I'm confused, but I'm not an idiot. However, even so, I'm afraid of hurting you. I have nothing to offer you, and you deserve so much better than an ex-con like me. Thelma just stared at me. I knew what she was thinking about what to say. I had no idea how she was going to answer. Then she said, "You're a knucklehead?" "Yes," I said, "knucklehead." "How thick is your skull?" "Didn't you hear what I told you?" "I love you. I've always loved you. Not what you own, not what you have, not for money or material possessions, but for you. Your heart, your inner being, which is what Dan Jones is what I love. Yes, you went to prison for doing what you thought was right in defense of your wife. I could never hold a grudge against you. In fact, I love you even more because I know you will protect me. My only problem is your feelings for me. Do you like me enough to make love to me, to hold me? I want to be your lover, your woman, maybe even your wife." Holy moly, how do I respond to this? Such a sweet, such a beautiful woman wants to know if I'm ready to make love to her. That's a question I can answer. My God, Thelma, I'm a man. A man who hasn't had a woman in over 15 years. There is nothing I want more than to have you as my woman. To make love to you every day, to do anything sexual you ask me to do. Until yesterday, I had no one. Now I have a family again and even grandchildren. Now you are telling me that I can have a woman that I really care for and respect, and yes, in some ways even love, and who loves the real me. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Danny. Are you ready to take the next step and see if we're compatible? And she tested me right there on the couch. Damn, that was so good. When I got up from the couch, she told me that I would have to scrub the stains off the couch the next day. I smiled at her, said, "Yes, ma'am," and headed for the shower. She walked into the bathroom with clean towels. I asked her if she was going to take me back to the apartment after my shower, and she said, "You're not going anywhere today, big boy. You made me a promise some time ago, and I intend to make you keep it." I had every intention of keeping it, but I wanted to hear it from her. As I stepped out of the shower, I realized I had nothing to wear. She handed me some underwear she'd pulled out of my old clothes and a pair of pajama pants. She showered and put on a negligee and a light robe. She looked amazing with wet hair. The next morning I woke up and she was still asleep. I put on my underwear and pajamas and went to the kitchen to make coffee. I couldn't help but think about Thelma. In just a few days, my whole life had changed for the better because of her. I had to ask myself, do I truly love her, or do I want her because it's been so long since I've been with a woman? Do I love her for all that she has done for me and my family? Of course, the answer was yes. No other person had ever done so much for me. That meant she loved me, but what about me loving her? I wanted to be with her, to do things with her. I wanted to do things for her. I wanted her to be an important part of my life. I wanted to go back to the room and make love to her again. When I put all those wants together, I got love her and need her. My decision had been made. I didn't care that it had only been a few days. I'd spent 15 goddamn years alone and I didn't want to be alone anymore. I went back to the bedroom, took off my clothes, and was going to make love to her again. She told me that she liked being woken up this way, with gentle touches, kisses, and light massaging of her body. I laughed when she told me that and then said, "Danny, let me go to the bathroom before we make love again. If you don't, my bladder won't hold it." When we got up, the coffee was already brewed, so we sat down at the table and talked for a few minutes. She cast a glance at the couch and said, "It looks like we've worn out my couch. Don't forget your promise to clean it before the kids come and see it." I went over to her closet looking for a brush and cleaner. Then I went and got busy cleaning the couch, while Thelma laughed at me the whole time. We had to shower again after all that sex. After showering, I reached into my garment bag and put on my blue Hawaiian shirt and jeans. I couldn't believe they still fit. It must have something to do with the prison food. We heard a knock on the door. Thelma looked out of her bedroom window and I heard her say, "Oh no, it's Brad." Of course, I asked who Brad was, and she said he was a guy she dated from time to time. I asked if she wanted to date him, and she said not anymore. A man has come into her life and he is all she can handle. I told her I would take care of it. Danny, he's taller than you by 3 inches and heavier by about 40 pounds. Please be careful. I told her that prison was on my side. People are afraid of those who have been in prison and also of those who have killed someone. I opened the door and this Brad guy asked me who I was and where Thelma was. I told him I was going to ask him the same question. My name is Brad. I'm a very good friend of Thelma's. And who are you? I'm Dan, Thelma's fiancé. I don't think Thelma needs your services anymore. A fiancé? Thelma never talked about a fiancé or marriage. I want to talk to her right now. I looked over and saw Thelma starting to get nervous. Bradley, I'm only going to say this once, so listen carefully. I'm Thelma's boyfriend. I was in prison for killing a man who molested my woman. I'm ready to come back to protect Thelma. Do you understand? No woman is worth going to jail over. Tell Thelma it's over between us and we'll see each other again. And he left. Thelma came out of the bedroom and asked what Brad had said. I know what she heard, but she wanted me to repeat it. He said you're not worth going to jail over. Should I go to jail because of Danny? What do you think? I'll be honest with you, Thelma. Fighting someone to get you to go out with me, no, I wouldn't. Prison is a very unpleasant place, but if it was for your protection, then yes, I would go to prison in a heartbeat to protect you. She wrapped her arms around me and pressed herself against my chest. The phone rang and Thelma answered it. It was Beth. She said she had called my apartment, but I wasn't there. She wanted to talk to me and asked if Thelma knew where I might be. Thelma handed me the phone. I said, "Hi." "Hi, Daddy," Beth spoke in a very sexy tone. "Did you spend the night at Aunt Thelma's, Daddy? Did you sleep well? That couch is kind of small," she laughed. "I slept great, and no, I'm not telling you anything. I'm still a father." I laughed. "What do you want, honey?" "Tomorrow we want to do something as a family. Mike and his family, Ed, me, and Danny. You, of course, and see if you can convince Aunt Thelma to go. We thought we could go to the zoo and get something to eat. We could fit everybody in 2 cars. What do you say, Daddy? Would you like to go?" "I'd love to go, honey, and I'll do my best to convince Aunt Thelma to go too. I'm sure I can persuade her to go. I mean, go." I laughed and Thelma slapped my arm. I handed the phone back to Thelma, who was still laughing. "Beth, we'd both love to come. I mean, drive." She had to laugh at her own gaffe. "I'm sorry, Beth, but your father makes me laugh. He's so crazy." "Well, take care of Daddy, Aunt Thelma, and we'll see you tomorrow around noon. Do you want us to take Daddy back to your place, or do you think he'll sleep on your couch again tonight?" Beth laughed. "Bye, Beth." "See you tomorrow," was all Thelma said. It was noon, and Beth pulled my nice clothes out of the dryer. She said we should go shopping and get me some clothes. She said she didn't want to be seen in my current clothes. I just needed a peace symbol on a chain, and I could pass for an old hippie. I told her I didn't have the money to buy clothes right now. She told me not to worry about it, and if I wanted to pay her back, I could. She just liked doing things for me. I told her I would pay her back every dime. I wanted to take care of her, not the other way around. She let me know that I was a man, and she understood that. Once I could afford it, I could buy her things if I wanted to. Now it was her turn to take care of me. She got dressed and put on her bra. We went into different stores looking for clothes for me. I still felt a little funny, but I agreed. Thelma said that if I was so worried, she would transfer the money to my card and I could pay for them. That made me feel a lot better. This woman always knew just what to say to make me feel better. I realized that I needed her in my life. That night, we practically repeated what we had done the night before. We made love twice, plus we played. We could put the average young newlyweds to shame. Life was finally good for me. The next morning, we got up early and had breakfast. Damn it, that woman could cook too. Even if it was only eggs, potatoes, and bacon, she must have done it with love. Everything tasted delicious. The kids arrived right on time. Beth said I could go with her and Thelma could go with Mike, and we'd switch on the way home. Beth smiled at me as I got into the car. She knew what I was thinking, what separates me and Thelma. "Dad, it'll only take half an hour." Of course, I pretended I didn't know what she was talking about. Ed asked where I'd gotten my new place. He welcomed me to the 21st century. I talked to them about various things, but spent most of my time talking to Danny, who sat in her car seat next to me. I loved this little girl, my granddaughter, whom I had only known for a couple days. I told her that I would be taking her and Mikey for rides in the stroller at the zoo. I wanted to be around my grandchildren. I still couldn't believe it. My grandchildren. I bought a double stroller and pushed my kids around. I didn't let anyone else do my work. Every time we came to an animal to feed, I went over and bought some food, peanuts, and stuff for the kids to feed them. Most of the food didn't make it to the animals, but the kids had fun with Grandpa. That's all I cared about. We went into an animal farm and I kept giving the kids food for the animals. They wanted to make sure each of the animals got something. Beth and Mike had cameras and they were taking pictures like crazy. I looked up at the cameras and I think everyone saw the happiness on my face. At that moment, I was probably the happiest person on earth. Life was good, especially with my family around. I rode back with Mike and Rachel. They really were a wonderful couple. I was very proud of him and told him so. We were having a nice conversation and Mike asked me a question. "Do you have any good advice for me, Dad?" I thought for a moment and then I told him, "Mike, always put your wife and child first in your life before your job, money, or anyone else. But most of all, love them like there's no tomorrow. That's the best advice I can give you, son." I got a little emotional until Mikey started talking about the zoo. I promised him that we would go there again soon. Mike said, "How's your back, Dad?" He smiled, and so did Rachel. "Okay, Mike." "Why do you ask?" "When I slept on Aunt Thelma's couch, my back really hurt." "I was just wondering if your back hurts." "The beds in prison are pretty uncomfortable." "I guess I'm used to them." I smiled, and so did Mike and Rachel. "We love you, Daddy, and hope the best for you," Mike said. We stopped at McDonald's to eat and let the kids play. I told Mike that I didn't mind. Even their food was better than what I was used to. After eating, we headed home. Back at Thelma's, we kissed everyone goodbye and said we'd see them sometime during the week. Chapter 4. Starting over. Thelma and I went back to the house and we were a little tired. Lots of sex, little sleep, and then we'd been walking around the zoo all day. I told Thelma that I should probably go back to my apartment because I had to go find out about my job the next day, and besides, we could both use some rest. "Do you really have to go, Danny? Can't you get dressed here in the morning and take the bus from here?" "I don't want to say goodbye to you, Danny. If you don't want to make love tonight, that's okay. We can still cuddle." "Thelma, that's exactly my problem. You won't get any sleep and you'll go to work tired and worn out. If I sleep with you tonight, there's no way I'm going to be able to keep my hands off you. I want to make love to you, and as tired as I am, I could make love to you right now." "Then let's do it, Danny. It's 7 o'clock, and if we start right now, we can go to bed and be ready for sleep by nightfall." "You see, Danny, I want you as much as you want me now." We locked the doors, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Thelma was right. By 10 o'clock, we were both sound asleep until the alarm clock rang in the morning. I got up first, showered, and put on my new clothes. Thelma was already up and in the shower by then. When she came out to dry herself, I walked in, kissed her, and pulled her to me. I told her to have a good day at work and to see her later. I walked to the bus stop and headed to the hardware store. Jim greeted me and invited me into his office. He told me that he had all sorts of information for me. For starters, I could get one of two jobs. I could work as a roadside salesman with great pay and incentives. The bail bond company saw no problem, as my jail time had nothing to do with money. In no time at all, I could get back on my feet. The second option was to work at the store. My pay would be about $9 an hour. That would be less than half of what I would make in sales. He encouraged me to sell large appliances, which helped a little. "Now about your 401, it has over $140,000 accumulated in it," Jim said. "My God, Jim, I had no idea it would be worth so much. How did this happen?" "According to the account administrator, your investment has been split several times and you've left it to accumulate and earn interest. The minus is that if you take any of the money out, it will be taxed as well as a 10% penalty. You can get your money back in a few days. If you want to talk to him, here's his name and phone number. He is right down the street at the bank. As for the jobs, I need to know which one you will accept." We filled out the paperwork for the job. I also filled out the surety papers because Jim told me that if I was going to work with money, I needed to be a surety. So either way, I had to fill out the paperwork. I had mentioned before that I wanted to meet with a bank teller and see what my options were. I needed transportation and I had to get my driver's license. On Tuesday, I was supposed to meet with my parole officer and tell him about my life. Jim and I have decided that I can start work next Monday. That way, I would have time to get my driver's license and be able to make deliveries. I asked Jim if I could borrow his car or truck if I needed to take the test. He didn't mind and told me to just stop by when I needed it. He would even drive me there if I needed it. I didn't realize what a good friend and boss he was. He didn't turn his back on me like so many others. He was a man I respected, and I knew I would work hard for him. Apparently, he believed that too. In the evening, I took the bus back to Thelma's house. I knocked on the door and she opened it. "What are you knocking for, you old geezer?" "Come on in. How was your day?" "I want to hear all about it." "Tell me about your day first." "I want to hear about your day too." "Tell me everything," I replied. "Okay, I'll go first. Everyone at work said they had never seen me so happy. They all wanted to know what had happened in the last few days to make me look and act as young and radiant as I did now. I told them that an old friend was back in town and I had spent some time with him. They said I should marry him if he could make me feel and look so good. "Okay, now it's your turn." "Let's see. Where do I start?" "I got a job today. I'll start next Monday." I explained her two options. A big paycheck and traveling sales or $9 an hour and working at a local store from 9 in the morning to 5 at night. "Which one did you take, Danny?" she asked. "First, I'll tell you about how my day went, and then I'll tell you about myself. I didn't tell anyone, but I had a 401k that I never cashed out. The problem was that any money I took out of it would be subject to a penalty. I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes." "What are you doing to me, Danny? Making me wait for the story to continue?" "It all ties together. Just bear with me. I got my driver's license today, too. Jim let me use the company truck to take the test. Would you believe it? I got my license with probation. Oh boy. A 45-year-old man with a suspended license. Now I need a car. When I finish our conversation, you and I will find me a little truck." "Where did you get the money for this, Danny?" "You didn't cash in your entire pension, did you?" "Okay, Thelma, let me explain. A few days ago, I had nothing but a few $100s. So all the money I have now is money that came out of the blue. I want to help my family, my children. I want to help you if I can. I need an automobile to get around. I don't like taking the bus." Thelma waited for the others. "Come on, Danny. What did you do? Stop stressing yourself out already." I smiled. "I took $10,000 for each of my children. You have to realize that I haven't done anything for them in a long time. It's not a huge amount, but I'm sure they can both use it, and maybe Beth can stay home more with Danny if she wants to. I know Mike can use it for business or personal use. It will be up to him." I looked at Thelma, who had tears in her eyes. She knew I had to do it. Pride means a lot to a man. I wanted to give some of mine back. I continued. "I took another $20,000 and opened a savings account in my name and yours. You must sign this card and return it to the bank. I want about $9,000 to buy myself a small truck to get around. The rest of the money is for anything you think we might need." So I had over $140,000 in my account. I had the rest for retirement. I can get it after I turn 59 and a half, no penalty. "What about the job, Danny? Which one did you take and what does it have to do with the savings account?" "I was going to apply for emergency funding and hope I could avoid a fine. Right now, the odds of me getting it are 50-50. I could save money on the taxable portion if I got married. My taxes would be cut by more than half." Thelma looked at me strangely. "Okay, let me get this straight. I want to make sure I understand everything. We've been making love for 3 days straight, and I think you're asking me to marry you to save on taxes. Right?" "Yes, that's right. Thelma, I've realized that I really do love you. Not just for the sex, which is wonderful, but for the inner person that Thelma is. A woman with a big heart is who I love. As for the job, if you agree to marry me, I'll take the 9-to-5 job. That way I won't be away from you at night. If you don't want to marry me, then I can be away most of the time and make more money. My kids will still be here on weekends when I come home." Thelma cried, "You big guy, of course I'd marry you. I'd even marry you so you could have your tax savings. God, I love you so much, Danny." Conclusion. Well, I took a 9-to-5 job. Bought myself a small used pickup truck for about $8,000. I gave each of my children $10,000. They both thanked me and told me they really appreciated the money and were going to put it to good use. Beth now works only 2 days a week, and on those 2 days, Thelma looks after Danny. Ed has taken a job as an apprentice welder, and his income has increased a lot. Mike's business is booming. His computer business is in great demand. He can give up any night work. He said he didn't want to be away from Rachel and Mikey. I don't blame him. As for Thelma and I, we got married the following weekend. I had to put off going to my new job for a week. We went on a short honeymoon to the Pocono Mountains, sightseeing during the day and making love at night. That's one thing we never stopped doing, making love. We may have to cut back a little, though. Thelma is 42 years old, but she's already carrying our child. Isn't life wonderful? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.